Welcome to Fostering Parenthood. Consent, porn,
normal relationship,
being a teen mom,
my first real adult love,
what it's like to be a foster child.
Every person I had an attachment with had left.
How trauma impacts your decision making.
I didn't feel very accepted and I didn't feel very safe.
And he said, you are lowering your own value by putting up with this.
But I wish someone was there to be there and tell me that it wasn't okay.
How do I honor providing that space for them?
It's about being in a place to be open to someone sharing with you their hurts.
Making sure that you guys are going into things open and supportive, or just even willing, right, to have these conversations.
I need you to find the strength to call someone and say, I'm drowning right now.
It's helpful to know yourself first as a caregiver.
But I just want caregivers to know that you're not alone.
You called me mom. Welcome to this episode of our podcast, where we discuss the crucial role caregivers play in supporting our Indigenous youth in care. Please be aware that sensitive topics, such as sexual exploitation and violence against Indigenous communities, will be covered in this segment. Indigenous youth are disproportionately represented in the foster care system, facing unique challenges concerning their sexual health and well-being. Their overrepresentation can lead to increased vulnerability to violence and exploitation. Today, we are joined by Raechel Ibarra, a case manager at the Children's Law Center, who will shed light on her work with Indigenous youth encountering commercial sexual exploitation of children, otherwise known as CSEC, and discuss the grassroots initiative, the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women Movement, MMIW. This movement aims to raise awareness, support affected families, and create policy changes to protect Indigenous communities. Join us as we uncover the unique challenges faced by Indigenous youth and the importance of the cultural connection in their reproductive health journey. I think one of the things that probably we should explain, I know as a caregiver myself, I wasn't really sure what Indigenous meant. Is that the same as a Native American? Is an Indigenous American? Could you just kind of describe that terminology?
Sure. So it depends on the individual, right? A lot of tribal members who are enrolled by a tribe, who are federally recognized or not, they will say I'm Native American. Some of them say that they're Indigenous. I myself identify as an Indigenous woman because my father's family's from Mexico, and we are Chicana or Chicanos, but we do have Indigenous roots in Mexico with Mexican tribes, if you will. And then my mother is Chiricahua Apache and Tahana Atham from the border of Arizona, right there. And there didn't used to be a border, so there was no lines there that were making us completely different. But when you talk about this in a system, where the system is concerned, it mostly means enrolled tribal members who are in ICWA children, right? They're ICWA identified. So that means they're federally recognized. Or if they're self-identified. Many tribes in California, there's a lot of disenrollment that happens. So some of those kids grow up with their cultural practices, but they're not Indians on paper, if you will. But they still identify as Native American. It's just that the courts and the laws don't identify them as Native Americans.
Is there an advantage for a youth to have that recognition on paper?
Yes. Yes, because that's one of the strongest arguments that we have for the system to do their due diligence and follow through with the active efforts, right? And so there's reasonable efforts at the court side, in the system, and then there's active efforts. And the difference is really going above and beyond and making sure that the families are getting what they need, or the youth are getting what they need. And so, for instance, if I have an ICWA identified youth on my caseload, and they want to participate in cultural services, and those services, let's say, so I'm in Sacramento, let's say they're in Stockton, they're 2 hours away. My argument, or our argument, is going to be this child has a right to their cultural and traditional teachings, and they would like access to that. So then we ask for transportation or funding to get from point A to B, in addition to, oversight, I guess, like somebody from that's going to be able to take them from point A to B if they don't have
And
a guardian, a legal guardian.
can you share what you do and what called you to do that hard work?
Sure. First, thank you for having me. It is an honor to be here and to share this information with you. I would like to start out by letting you all know that I am living on the traditional homelands of the Nishanan, Miwok, and Maidu peoples. Some people call it Sacramento today. And that's so my day job is I am a senior CSEC Case Manager at the Children's Law Center. And what I do is I work with youth in the foster care system who have been exploited or are at risk of being exploited. And I mean, when you think about it, every kid in foster care, is very vulnerable. So you can, arguably say that they're all at risk. So I've been in this position for almost 4 years in April, and I absolutely love it.
Well, good for all of us, right? That you're in the position and that, that you had the background to bring with you. In terms of CSEC, we've talked about, sexual exploitation so much in our culture, but I think that we really don't understand why certain subgroups, certain populations are more at risk. Why are Indigenous youth more at risk of being a victim of CSEC than perhaps a child in foster care? And I'm talking specifically about foster care. So an Indigenous youth in foster care as opposed to another child in foster care. Why are they more at risk?
So I think there's a lot of factors to that, right? So intergenerational trauma plays a huge role in this. And I think that is very much, it's now being more recognized, but as far as it being played out in the court system or even like on trials or in the arguments, it still doesn't get enough, there's not enough weight behind that. What I mean is like, oh yeah, they have intergenerational trauma. Everybody has trauma, right? But there's something specific or something different about families who will be targeted and go into the system, such as, Black, African American, and Indigenous families, and even Mexican American families. They're all families of color. They are, the numbers are staggering. There's a disproportionate, compared to their white peers. And so a disproportionate number, sorry. And so obviously there's a reason why. I think poverty is one, but it's not even necessarily poverty. So there could be something like, so this is like a case example, if you will. If there is a youth in the home and there's concern of, let's say, domestic violence, and it's not a clear concern, it's just like a rumor, right? Like, let's say the neighbors made a 911 call because they think that something's weird or something's going on, or they heard something. If they make that call and law enforcement comes to the home to check out what's happening and the lights are not on in the home, in the past, there were children that were removed specifically because the lights were not on. And now we know today that poverty is not a reason to remove, right? So a lot of things like that happen. There are also, we have generational homes, right? So for instance, when I was raised, I lived with my grandparents often when I was a kid, with my mother, or when we would move out from my grandparents. I had aunties, I had cousins. So our family systems were interdependent. And so there's a lot of that happens as well. So there could be this idea that a child is going to be removed from their family of origin. And if the family cannot afford their own place, and they have aunties and uncles that are in there, and then some of the aunties and uncles don't want to participate in the system, then there's cause to not give them back because the family's not cooperating, all these other things. So there's that end of it where the families are concerned. Once a kid gets into the system and they are placed with families that are not of their ethnic background, they are essentially a fish out of water. So there's a sense of belonging that many of the youth have, especially the Native American children, because they just don't belong into these other homes. And when I say that, it's not necessarily because they're abused, but there's just something that if we have a commonality in a meeting of minds, and it could be over just food, right? That's going to make them feel at home. And so like, that's another example I can give you. We have a youth who was placed in foster home and did, was very safe and was there for a really long time. But they just kept expressing like, I don't like their food. I want my food. And it was, her family was from Mexico, and all the food traditionally that we would make, right? That she missed that. And so she just wasn't able to connect to that family at all. So that's a really big miss too, that people think that it is, it's not as important. You have a roof over your head. You have all these other things. Why are you complaining, right? Like you could have it way worse. So there's that side of it too. Another part of it is that they are removed from their communities. And so if you have a child, let's say, who is from a rancheria or in California and comes from Northern California to Sacramento, they're that far from home and they don't have any safety pockets here. So they're determined to get back home, right? What is the amount of danger or harm that we are putting that child in from Sacramento, let's say, to Humboldt County, right? So, and they'll get there no matter what it takes, they're going to get there. And so I think that the removal from the communities, right? There's already systemic trauma, right? And racism that makes them incredibly vulnerable. There's a huge distrust within the families themselves and system providers. The language that they use is very victim blaming, it is not trauma focused or client centered, if you will. Not everybody uses that. So there's definitely a lot of different factors. I think, one of the biggest misses too are the Two-Spirit LGBTQ youth as well. And the Two-Spirit is a term that most people don't understand or even know of. And so oftentimes Indigenous people or Native American people will ask me how many Two-Spirit clients I have, and I'll say none because they don't know what it is. And we don't have elders or providers who know what it is to teach them who they are and what that means. So that's a really big gap in the system that people are learning about now, hopefully taking a little bit more seriously. But I could go on for days for that, for the reasons why they are basically more vulnerable. One more thing is, so on rancherias and reservations, there's all of these different laws with the jurisdiction. And this is where we talk about the MMIW movement and where we talk about the foster care to MMIW pipeline. And that's the missing and murdered Indigenous women or people. Some of us call it missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. And so with that said, if you have a non-Native person go onto reservation and assault your Native daughter and then leave reservation, nobody can prosecute that guy. He walks away free, right? So there's all these different laws. There's all these different types of finger pointing as to whose jurisdiction it is. That's, I think, one of the biggest reasons why children are targeted right on reservation and lured off, if you will. So,
wow, I never thought about that. I never thought about the fact that reservations are a different nation. They really are not a part of our rules and our government. It's almost like I would think certain folks who are predators would think that it's almost easy pickings because if they can get away with it, there's no way that they can be prosecuted. And I don't know if that's a fact, but it just seems like seems logical. I know another issue that we deal with too is the limited number of foster care homes, just in general, but the limited number of ICWA homes, those folks that are part of that culture is so limited. Do you find that in your work?
Yeah. So I feel like babies take the priority over everybody, right? Just because they are so vulnerable. So I think some of the ICWA homes that they're that we do have a lot of younger children in them. I have yet to have a client go into an ICWA home as a teenager. And that's another thing I think that is for teenagers across the board, Indigenous or not, there is this language that is used that in this message, nobody wants me because I'm a teenager. And in which I think like, oh my God, like that's what a horrible, horrible message to receive, right? I'm already in foster care. Nobody wants me because of my age. So that in itself is really just damaging. You know what I mean? I will say, I think the most vulnerable people in foster care right now that I have recognized that are the most vulnerable for everything, right? Like drug use, all of the things, are the youth who have been given up for adoption and raised by adoptive parents and then sent back into the system because the adoptive parents can no longer handle them. Those are the kids who are exploited, but really have so much trauma and they're just so sad, and then when there's no available homes for you in foster care, it's just like really nobody really wants me, so there's this messaging that definitely needs to be changed. The idea of having a kid in foster care in your home, everybody wants to do that when they see the problem and they see the issues. But there's so much that comes with them. There's so much trauma. And it literally is like you have to quit your job in order to make sure that this kid stays on track because the demands of the system are absolutely impossible. And,
go ahead.
I was going to say, and for Indigenous families, it seems sometimes almost unreachable because if mom has to, if mom is a single mom and she's working and she has parenting classes and she has younger youth who are in childcare, but she doesn't have transportation, she has to, raise this family and then do her parenting classes at the end of the day and also be a mom who's present for her children here and then also maintain a relationship with all of these system providers and trying to get her own child back. It is an impossible ask sometimes. And you really have to have somebody who is completely dedicated and focused on getting that child back in their care no matter what it takes. A lot of people are, but it takes a very, very long time for them to have to jump through all these hoops in order to get them back. In addition to it being the Western way that they get their healing and get their children back. So, there's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah, it really, as I hear you talk about it and I think about sometimes how, I don't know, just lost I feel in a Western, culture. And here's this beautiful community, this rich tribe, this rich culture, this beautiful land. And this child who doesn't want to go anywhere is all of a sudden forced off that reservation, put into what we're going to say is a safe home.
Right.
And they feel lost. They don't have any access to the medicine, to the healing power of those that they trust the most. And I can't even imagine what that would be like.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a lot that goes into it. I think too, what's funny is all of the ICWA identified children on my current caseload, there are, I think maybe 2 of them that identify as Native Americans. The other ones are like, I don't do that. Like, what do you mean you don't do that?
Why don't they?
Because they're either raised as Black, African American, or they're raised as Mexicans. So they're like, tribe, what are you talking about? I think a lot of people don't, they don't understand that we have youth from all over the nation that could end up in foster care in Sacramento due to relocation, due to whatever has happened in the past, right? So children who are from tribes in the Dakotas, their families had relocated and they came to Sacramento. and their children are in the system now. Same with them in Oklahoma. We have tribes from like New York, and their kids are with us. So there's this big miss, I think, in the Sacramento community where like, oh, we welcome all Native youth. And some people do, but a lot of tribes are very exclusive to their own people because they have to be. That's where the funding goes, right? To our own tribal members.
Well, I think we have
So
a
it's a
history
dance.
yeah, I think we have a history as a culture of kind of trying to take the native out, right? Where we used to take
Yeah.
kids forcibly and put them in boarding school so that we could raise them in Western ways as opposed to
Right.
their own culture. Such a sad place that we're in at times when we think we know more, right? We've got all the wisdom, and yet the wisdom of centuries is right there to be had. And I think the
Absolutely.
importance of keeping kiddos in their culture for that healing, making sure that they're safe. Do you think that that's done through education? You think that being able to provide education on the reservations would help? No?
No, because I don't think that it's the Indian people who are sending their children away. So,
Agreed.
Agreed.
But I meant in order to protect them. Like these are, I know as a caregiver myself, I even have a hard time protecting my kids because of social media and the predators that are out there. It's just, I don't know what I don't know. I would never send my children into harm's way, but I would fall into it based on my not knowing.
Yeah. Right. So, I mean, there's a bunch of different, I guess ways to discuss that. I think too, a big thing is, some families, sex trafficking is very normal and it's generational. And so
Yes.
our moms and our aunties, they work because that's how they're bringing in money. Right. Domestic violence is very normalized in some of our family systems. And it definitely was in mine. And, my heart with the MMIW movement is an experience where my cousin was actually murdered by her own husband, I think in 2004 or 2006. I always get the date messed up, and I hate that because I'm bad with numbers like that. But, she needs to be honored with the right information. And so, we always thought that it was just fighting. We thought it was fighting. And we thought this is how people communicate, or not communicate, but yeah. And so it's usually not completely absent that domestic violence is kind of a normal type of behavior or maladaptive behavior, if you will. Even the emotional abuse or the mental and verbal abuse is so damaging, and we don't necessarily think of it that way until you're older, right? And then you're like, wow, I'm jacked up from all of this stuff. Right. But so there's that. And a lot of people don't talk about that, the trafficking that is generational in your families. And they don't talk about mothers who traffic their own daughters. They don't talk about fathers who traffic their own sons or daughters, right? There is just this constant silence because there, first of all, is not a lot of trust, right? And if I tell you this and I need help, then you're going to take me away from my family. And you taking me away from my family is more scary than anything I've ever experienced. And so there's that. It's just the mistrust. Also, in tribal communities, confidentiality is a really big thing. And so I could tell you and you could be related to the chief, and that's not going to be a good thing, right? So there's all of just these different types of layers that go into it. People definitely, I think, understand what it is. They just don't know what it's called. And so until you get the education as to what it is that has happened to you, then you'll be like, oh, okay, I get it. Another thing I think that is a super vulnerable, makes them, it's like a perfect segue into exploitation with all youth in foster care. They all have experienced child sexual abuse. And so at any age that you are molested or assaulted by a family member, you're already groomed. So when you meet whoever, you already know what they like. It's familiar to you. You don't necessarily know what's happening, but it's very familiar. Okay, I remember this. This person's nice to me. This person is, it starts from there. So that's another reason I think why education, is really, really important, but it also takes the language that we use to talk to everybody, to caregivers, to kids. Kids don't say, I'm a victim of human trafficking. They will never tell you that.
Right.
And so whatever it is, how they identify is the language that you use. They say, I'm hustling. They say, I'm working. And you say, what's your side hustle? And then they'll say, oh, and then little by little you get information like that. So it all depends on the language. It all depends on the audience, and it all depends on the willingness to look at what it actually is as opposed to what you want it to actually be,
Wow. Great information. Really important. We have to know the right questions to ask. We have to know the language to listen for, even if it's not in a question. It's just simply, oh, wait, I heard that. And now I need to pay attention to that to keep my kiddo safe.
Right. Trading something of value is the way that I explain it to them. So anything that's valuable, do you have value as a person on the planet, as a 15-year-old in foster care? And they'll be like, hell yeah, I'm dope. And so you start at that conversation. You can also understand the way that they talk and the language that they use. So if you were to ask them, hey, are you hustling? Are you working? They're like, no, I don't have a work permit. I don't have a job, So then, okay, then you're not, right? So it all depends too on the information that the kids have access to, the people that they're surrounded by. And so it's an ongoing issue. Sex trafficking is not new by any means. And it just continues to get bigger and stronger, even though the movement is bigger and stronger, because people are more creative about how they're luring and how they're hiding and how they're exploiting,
Absolutely. Well, Raechel, thank you so much for bringing an awareness to us that we may not have gotten anywhere else. And to think about our Indigenous youth being raised and healed in an environment that they don't even recognize is really sad. And I so appreciate you coming on and sharing your heart and just being who you are. So thank you so much, Raechel.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure.